Hello and welcome to this pre-election roundtable from Hindus for Human Rights. I am joining from Mianjin, the unceded lands of the Yagera and Turba people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I wanted to give a very brief introduction of Hindus for Human Rights, which is a community and advocacy organization that bats for a pluralistic and inclusive faith, and also for human rights that are based on the values of truth, justice, and humanity. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to just acknowledge the horrific, assault on pilgrims and tourists in Pahalgam in Kashmir. And it's a matter of great grief for everyone of the community, no matter what faith, what culture, what language. And I just want to take a moment to say that this meeting that we're having today seems even more relevant and pertinent because we have to keep talking to each other. And there's something about democracy that needs to be protected by all of our participation. And that is why I'm so thankful that all of you are here. I wanted to also say that sometimes it feels like we take some of these things for granted. You know, the fact that we have a voice, the fact that we are safe, even the weather. And Bob will have something to probably talk about sustainability in a couple of minutes. But yes, I'm hoping that through this session, we get to hear a diverse range of views and the issues that are really important going into the elections. I'll do a quick introduction. We have Manjot, who's a passionate climate advocate and community leader. Maybe you can give us a wave. We have Khushaal Vyaas, who's a lawyer. He's a community organizer, podcaster. We have Saba Zaidi, who's just run upstairs to join us in just a minute. She is the director of Nuvera Media. She's an actor, community leader as well. We have Bob Sudarshan, who's the chief enabling officer of Purpose with Profit, deeply invested in democracy, sustainability, doing good. We have Rev Manas Ghosh, of course, with us, who's a pastor, community leader, and such a great ally for us in the work that we do. And finally, of course, we have our wonderful chair, Shanti Raman, who is a doctor, a community leader, great bridge builder. She seems to know almost everybody across the world, actually, works across some crazy timelines. And it's just wonderful to have all of you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I will begin with just talking a little bit about the elections. The University of Sydney put out a report on the key issues ahead of election day. The things that they mapped out was affordable housing, rental protections, cost of living crisis, fixing the migration system, making childcare cheaper, more accessible, energy transition plans, women's health, and new models of care for older Australians. Just to add a bit to that, Amnesty put out another set of important issues, and they say that it's important to legislate a national human rights act that transforms Australia's approach to human rights, justice, and equality. It talks about the over-imprisonment of First Nations children, preventing abuse in youth detention centers, and it also talks about adopting a humane and generous policy to support refugees, people seeking asylum, and the promotion and defense of international human rights. So as you can see, it's a really big plate, and there are lots of different things that are important to different people. I'll begin with Shanti. You're a children's doctor. You're also deeply involved in community, culture, activism, human rights. What are some of the big issues that you're thinking of as we go into the federal election? And also, the AMA has called for urgent healthcare reform and issued a call to modernize Medicare. For multicultural communities and families, what are some of the key issues from your perspective?
Yeah, I'll answer it from my own particular bias. So I'm a community pediatrician and in charge of a very large, diverse population in southwestern Sydney. For us, we think about priority populations. This is a term that's gained currency in recent times, if you look at Australia overall, we're generally doing okay in terms of health, okay? We're mostly well off. But of course, the gaps between the rich and poor, whichever way you look at it, and the haves and the have-nots, have been exacerbated by 3 years of COVID-related socioeconomic stressors and a whole lot of other things. So with respect to children and young people, the priority populations for us are very clearly Aboriginal or First Nations families. Number two, newly arriving refugees, particularly those with poor language and cultural connection, and a big trauma background. Number three are children with disability, and this is the same of adults as well, obviously. Number four are children who have experienced, the care and protection system, so children in out-of-home care, those who have been abused and neglected and have trauma. And of course, the other group, and they are either a big or a small group, depending on where you are geographically, are, those who are living in poverty. As I said, we know that COVID has actually exacerbated a lot of these big ticket items, and those who were doing badly before have just exploded. So the top issues for us, clearly strengthening Medicare, but more importantly, strengthening a national system, publicly affordable national system of healthcare is really important. So whilst we are all very happy with Labour Party, boosting Medicare and encouraging the and talking about bulk billing for GPs, that is not going to touch the big gap we have in specialist access, which is largely private and delivered, by private facilities, private doctors. This is a very big divide, and Australia, shockingly, has a very big out-of-pocket. Australians have very big out-of-pocket expenditure for private specialist healthcare, actually worse than the US. So we do need to acknowledge that big issue. The other big issue, of course, dental health and those sort of things. I think that we always should get back to thinking, when you're spending on health and healthcare, the biggest bang for buck is actually preventive healthcare, which often gets the least response. And I'm sure all of you will talk about aspects of that. So prevention is everything from looking at, climate change mitigation and environmental health, through to well-being, looking at our lifestyle, looking at mitigating all the ills of the COVID-19 pandemic, all of that. So I think prevention really should be top in our what we should be asking for. Obviously, along with that comes research. And again, I think, unfortunately, we have not heard enough about academic support and research. We were so hopeful that some of the terrible, atrocious cuts that had happened through the 9 years of the Conservative government would be redressed by this current government, but that hasn't happened, and it just has not rated a mention. So I think research is a big issue. And coming to our migrant population, we need to be taken seriously, not tokenistically. We actually have migrant populations that are very diverse, and we have to acknowledge that certain groups of migrants are doing it really badly, and others are still okay with the healthy migrant effect. Australia has actually benefited from wealthy, educated, very industrious migrants, largely from Asia, who have actually, done a lot to boost Australia's productivity. But what we do need to acknowledge is that healthy migrant effect may not last very long when we have the rise of chronic disease, things like obesity related problems, we know our migrant populations are much more likely to have chronic disease like obesity related issues like diabetes, but also we have other independent risk factors. So hypertension, cardiac problems, and all of these are happening at younger and younger ages. So I think that we've got to push for the government to, well, for the next incoming government to look at, you know, culturally, linguistically diverse populations, not just as COLs, which a term that I really detest, but really unpack who we are and how we can respond to our unique needs, both by strengthening the good things. So a lot of migrant communities come with great positives. We have fabulous, you know, community and family glue, and there are many strengths. So the strengths should be supported and built up, and where we have problems, they actually need to be well supported and responded to, not in a, you know, lumping together of all of us, but taking us seriously. And that means unpacking what the migrant issues are with a truly respectful and culturally competent lens. So I'll stop there.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
sure
that's
I'll have
great,
lots to say
Shanti.
about other things. Sorry.
That's great, actually. And would anyone like to add to any of these great points that Shanti has made around seeing multicultural communities as diverse, preventive? Anyone has a comment or anything to add?
I think I'll just add in very, very briefly what Shanti is saying, that I think particularly in light of what we're talking about in multicultural communities and migrant issues, I think that's definitely something that a lot of multicultural communities do feel, that often come election time, it's treated as a tokenistic kind of, we want your vote, but are we actually seeing you and your issues? And I think as migrants, that is something that is a fair observation to make. But I think that what Shanti has also said is also true, that often even we as migrants do take some things for granted. And it is important that politically we don't take things for granted, in that one of the big issues that I am seeing, that I'm sure most migrants are seeing, is that when the going gets tough, and this isn't something that's new, but when the going gets tough, migrants are often used as the scapegoat for issues that are much more complicated and have significantly higher structural issues. So for example, when we're looking at the housing crisis, when we're looking at cost of living more generally, migrants are often the easiest narrative to pick on, to say that, there are more migrants, therefore not enough houses, therefore there's your issue. Much easier narrative to follow, whereas the reality is much more complicated and much more difficult to actually put forward. Unfortunately, whether it's fair or not, it is incumbent as us as migrants to not shy away from those debates anymore, to be afraid to rock the boat, but to actually come forward to those debates and actually use our voices, whether it be on TikTok, whether it be on social media, whether it be engaging with politicians. Because I fear that where we have taken things for granted before has been where we've been too silent on issues. So where we do complain about scapegoating, it is true, it is unfair. It's also incumbent on us to kind of fight back against that rhetoric as well.
Wonderful addition to that. Thank you, Khushaal. We'll move on to Saba, and Saba has, I think, to leave early, so I've kind of moved you up. You are a long-standing multicultural leader and part of a cultural fabric that's been inclusive and celebratory in most ways. You've also seen Australia change and morph over the years. What do you think are important issues from a culture and belonging standpoint? And we, like Khushaal said, the tokenism and photo ops can only go so far. What does a truly multicultural society look like? And do you have a view on which political party, if you wanted to talk about that, has the best chance of actually understanding and getting us there?
Thank you, Nandini, for having me, included me in this discussion. As people before me have mentioned, that yes, the whole tendency is now for a kind of a tokenism. And whenever the election comes, you see all the politicians They will wear saris, they'll come to all Indian functions, they will have, photo opportunities with people. And so that they're trying to allure by this kind of narrative, which is absolutely superficial. So I migrated almost 35 years now in Australia, and I have seen a big shift, and yet it is not enough. It is it's quite superficial. Earlier, you couldn't see the faces, and because I belong to media and I belong to theater and culture, and so it was very, very white Australia, and we could hardly see anyone, and they would not even let you participate, because the whole idea is that of editorial control on the media, which was very much a part of the mainstream culture. And they will just shove you off, go to SBS, go to this, and they're, 60, 50, how many different ethnic groups who are all trying to carve out a little place there. So it was like you were just pushed away, and so much so that they had no idea what the media and culture in other countries was doing, other than very Anglo-Saxon, Western type of culture. So, it has taken a long time. Yes, now you do see a lot of faces. You do see many more programs on South Asia, a lot more in, discussions and debates. But yet I feel that it is not enough when it comes to art, culture, and because there is a tendency to, one size fit all. There is no one Indian community or South Asian community. We are such a diverse group of individuals, cultural groups divided on linguistic, cultural, regional basis. And we as migrants also have this tendency, and I'm talking about the first generation migrants, that they get into their own ghettos, and they get into a kind of, what should I say, a kind of they only meet their own kin and kith, because there is certain cultural comfort. There is comfort in, you can share your culture and language, but it is at the cost of becoming a part of the mainstream culture. That is the case with the first generation migrants, I feel. And therefore, they're quite active within their own little groups, quite active culturally, but they are not participating more openly into the mainstream cultural activities. The story is different with the second generation. They have become far more, because they have certain securities, they have certain, but again, they're participating on those cultural activities. I don't know whether the opportunities is equal. They are on the level playing field with rest of the community. I as an actor, I'll give you that example, that I get roles offered to me, or I go for them when there is an Indian ethnic grandmother role playing. As an actor, as a trained actor, why cannot I become a lawyer in a mainstream show? But it doesn't happen. So we tend to push people into different categories, and okay, you can become a part of us only if we can, if we have groomed you in our culture. I have an Indian face, I have an Indian look, I have an Indian maybe accent, but at the same time, do I fit into their description of, and they categorize you. So this is a tendency that I feel that we are still not on the equal level playing field, because they are constantly putting us in different categories. And then there is not enough funding for any of the stuff. I started the first South Asian DTH platform here because there was nothing about Indian culture. And then my kids were growing up, and I said, no, they should know what their culture is. They will imbibe what's Australian mainstream culture, but there is their own identity and their own sense of belonging, which is important for them to inherit. And with that intention, I started a DTH platform called South Vision Asia. And then, I ran it for 10 years. And then later on, I started a cultural group, a theater group. Now, to get any kind of funding is almost impossible. From any funding bodies, they just, even to get a small funding like $5,000, I have to do so much of paperwork and so much of, it's just so ridiculous. This is, oh, it's not worth my time. So basically, what happens is that opportunities are very few, very apart. If I don't speak their language, if I don't think like them, if I don't uh, conform to their aesthetic ideals, then I am the other person. Yes, we'll get you when we need you. So I'm just sort of trying to give you an example. Of course, the fault is also with us that we are more inward looking, because that is us as security or safety or whatever you may say, that at least we have some way to express ourselves. But on the other hand, when we try to reach out to the mainstream, there are so many other ifs, do's, and buts are there. As far as the political parties are concerned, because it's an election year, a lot, will come and do say nice things about you, and, wear saris and wear kurta pajamas and do all the little showing that, we care for you. But I think there is no understanding. And as far as they've not even tried to reach out, because the new migrants and new citizens, they have no idea how this electoral system works. It's very different. And how to vote. Preferential voting, they don't understand very well. So I don't know how much is being looked at from that point of view. On the other hand, a lot of interest groups have jumped into it, and they are trying to capitalize on their ethnicity or on their religion or on their, issues like migration, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's very important for us to look at what their policies are and not go for a desi face, not go for a, somebody who's got this from the same religion or the same, who's appealing to these emotions, but to look in the long term, what is it that is their policies are talking, and are they just, lip service, or they really mean it? See their track records. So, I mean, I see a lot of these, and I'm not going to tell you who is a good, but I think please do make an effort to relate to the issues that concerns the migrant communities, and which of course is expressed through culture, through different interactions in the community. So, but I think they are, people need to be very careful, our community voters. And I would ideally like to see that there is more inclusivity of the culture, because culture is very important. The language is very important. Do we have to reinvent ourselves to be acceptable in the cultural scenario of Australia, or can we be inclusive, and can we be recognized for who we are? It's very important. I mean, these are some of my raw ideas,
No,
and I just thought.
absolutely.
Sorry.
No, I said it's really useful to hear that, because you've sort of drawn a line from how it used to be and where we are now. And
Yes.
it's an interesting journey where a lot of things have changed, but a lot of things have stayed the same. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Anyone has a comment? We'll try and keep it a bit quick. I think we'll move on. I want to ask Reverend Manas Ghosh the next question. We are seeing an increasing divisiveness, both within multicultural communities across religion and caste and class lines, as well as increased racism against people of color. There seems to be a sentiment that some Anglo-Australians are also feeling that they are not being heard and their concerns are not being adequately addressed. And this sort of is the flip side of the so-called very visual appeasement by wearing the sari. And, it just seems like they're appealing to particular interest groups and cultures and not thinking more broadly. What role do you think community leaders and religious leaders can play in acting as channels of communication and engagement between government and community, particularly in light of the elections? And what are some of your thoughts?
Thank you, Nandini. And I also thank you for including me in this discussion. At the beginning, you mentioned about the loss of lives in a very unfortunate and in a cruel way in Kashmir, but I would also like to add the passing away of Pope Francis, who did some wonderful, wonderful work for the migrant and the poor and the refugees. So I acknowledge that, and also acknowledge the original owners and custodians of the land where I'm sitting and joining in this discussion, the Dharamaragal people of the Gringai Nation, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And my prayer is always that may we walk gently on this sacred land and work together for reconciliation, justice, and peace.
Thank
It's
you.
a very crucial time, and the question that you have raised is very pertinent. So, the election time, and election actually has already started, hasn't it?
Yes, yes, it
Yes.
has. So we're right at the start of it.
It's already started. You can go and vote early if you want to. Look, I believe that community and religious leaders can play a vital role in acting as channel or conduit, you can say, for communication and engagement between government and the diverse community they represent, particularly during times of heightened social tension and political division. Um, in Australia, in recent time, we can see growing fractures within multicultural communities. There's also a resurgence of racism and you can say perceived sense of marginalization among some Anglo-Australians. And all these reinforce an urgent need for inclusive dialogue, trust building, and effective representation. I am a theologian and a pastor, and my area of expertise is working with people from different faith. And I can say that the communities and the religious leaders at this stage need to serve both as advocates and mediators. I would say that most of them enjoy the trust of their respective communities, and this trust actually places the religious leaders and the community leaders in a very unique position to articulate their experiences, concerns, their hopes and aspirations and their dreams, and they can bring it to the government when they make decisions. But at the same time, I think they must communicate government policies and initiatives back to their communities in a culturally sensitive and accessible ways, and to make sure that the information is not only understood but trusted and implemented. Shanti at the beginning mentioned about COVID, and at that time, every fortnight, couple of hundreds of religious leaders from all sorts of faith, they used to meet on Zoom. And at that time, we used to have the discussion about how to control that COVID thing, how we can stop it, how we can stop it spreading. And it really worked when the religious leaders and the community leaders, they brought it back to their communities and helped the people to implement those decisions. But there's one pressing concern, and during this time leading to election, is the politicization of multicultural communities. My two previous speakers just gave a hint of that. Sometimes the leaders of the multicultural communities are viewed as conduits for vote banks rather than valued contributors to a shared national narrative.
So important, yes.
And this can show resentment, particularly if other groups, such as some segments of Anglo-Australian population, feel their concerns are being overlooked.
Mm.
As you know, as a minister, I work with all sorts of people, and my huge number of people that I work with are Anglo-Australian people. And there is, not among everyone, but even within small pockets, I can see some kind of resentment. And it's not healthy because they create an us versus them mentality.
Mm.
And it really undermines all the work that we as community leaders try to do to bring this national or social cohesion and harmony and peace. So I believe that community leaders must model inclusive leadership, working not just within their own cultural or ethnic or faith groups, but across communities to foster mutual understanding. I face the challenge of it almost every day. We have been talking mostly about this Indian communities, but how very diverse we are. I mean, I come from Bengal, I come from Calcutta, but even in the small state of Bengal, there is so many different kind of Bengalis. So we really sometimes need to just go out of our this cultural or ethnic or faith cocoons,
Mm.
call it, and mix with other people and work together to create mutual understanding. And I think the religious leaders also should promote and support interfaith and intercultural dialogues and create opportunities for sharing, storytelling, and relationship building. If at this point, if I may quote, I'll quote a famous theologian called Hans Kung. And he was a Roman Catholic theologian, and he said something very interesting. He said that there cannot be peace in the world if there is no peace among the nations. There cannot be peace among the nations if there is no peace among the religions. And there cannot be peace among the religions if there is no dialogue between them. So we really need to sit and talk and share, and that's how we can build good relationship and we can work together. But they should also be, in my mind, be proactive in calling out all forms of discrimination, whether it's racism against people of color or subtle forms of exclusion based on, as you mentioned in your question, class, caste, or faith. It's crucial for the community and religious leaders to engage in non-partisan political education, encouraging civic participation, voting, advocacy, community forums. We all touched on these things, that we have to do these things together and for empowerment rather than endorsement. What I'm presently observing at this time is it's a big issue, that the rise of divisive rhetoric. And it often targets migrants, refugees, or specific faith groups for political gain. In recent times, there's been a steep rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, Hinduphobia, Christianphobia, you name it. There also have been desecration of sacred spaces, temples, gurdwaras, synagogues, churches. And I was really shocked. Only the other day I found it from the Islamophobia register that Islamophobia has risen to 518% in recent time. That's very alarming. So it's vitally important for leaders of communities and religious leaders to prepare their communities to navigate this challenging situation calmly and with resilience and without any kind of retribution. And this includes countering misinformation, building cross-community solidarity, and working with media outlets to ensure fair representation. And ultimately, the role of a community or religious leader is to humanize the people they represent. They need to bridge divides and inspire hope. And their engagement with government should be ongoing, not just when there is a festival or there is election or something like that.
Yes.
So we need to keep that thing going so that we can communicate with them in a fair and open way. And we all can together contribute to create an inclusive and harmonious and peaceful community.
Thank you. Thank you for that. A lot of what you said was so moving because I think it doesn't just apply to this point in time. It's such universal things that you brought to the table. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, our deepest condolences also at the passing of the Pope. And it's very heartening when leaders of that stature actually talk about things like migrants and refugees and the people who are often overlooked. So this feels like a big loss, not only for one community, but I think globally. So thank you for acknowledging that as well.
Thank you. I mentioned Pope's name this reason because I'm a Protestant, so in that sense, Pope is not the head of church for me, but his vision
Yes,
is
universal.
just wonderful and for everyone. I mean, since his passing away, I have received so many messages from people of other faith sending to me about how much they are sorry and sad about his passing away and how much the Pope actually has inspired and influenced them. So
One of the things I do notice is that, that just the fact that he spoke about things that not many other people were speaking about, that itself feels like, why is it that we have such a dearth of leaders who actually talk about these things? And that just puts it in stark relief. So thank you for that. I'll move on to Manjot. Manjot, you're a passionate community leader. You were at our holy event as well, and you spoke so wonderfully there. And Reverend Ghosh, you were talking about interfaith celebrations and meetings, and I'm so thankful that so many of you have participated in Hindus for Human Rights events. And Shanti, of course, is the great connector, and she's brought so many of you together. And that's part of what we do, and we're very thankful for everybody being there. Manjot, you care deeply about climate justice, getting more multicultural communities a seat at the table in this conversation. What is your perspective on the major and minor parties? Where do they stand? How are you thinking? What are the big issues?
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's shared so far this afternoon. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm on Gadigal country today and paying my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I also want to acknowledge that Indigenous people across the world, including First Nations people here in Australia, have been taking care of country and nature and the environment for thousands of years. Including in South Asia, where Adivasi people are often on the front lines of mining projects, front lines of environmental destruction, and are still holding the line to take care of our natural spaces. And I want to start there. I think with climate, we've gotten to this place where no one can deny that the climate is changing. We all feel it. Like, who here has felt a heat wave? Who here has, experienced the breathing in smoke from the 2019 bushfires? Who knows someone whose house is now uninsurable? Millions of houses are now uninsurable because of the high risk of flood and bushfire. The climate is already changing and we're feeling it every day. But more importantly, our communities back in South Asia are feeling it even worse. And in South Asia, countries like India and Pakistan are going to be the worst affected by climate change, and they already are. And for me, I feel like it is such a privilege for me to live in Australia. And I feel grateful for the education and the opportunities that have been offered to me by my parents' hard work. And I feel like living in Australia, we have a real opportunity and a real responsibility to take action to stop climate change. I sit here, you know, with the privilege of a safe home and a great education and the time to try and work on stopping climate change, whilst people in my village are currently feeling the brunt of a heat wave. I'm not sure if everyone has seen, but a massive heat wave is bearing down across the north of India right now. It's about to hit Punjab, where my family's from. Last time there was a heat wave last year, my neighbor passed away in the fields while farming. He had no prior health conditions. And my neighbor's daughter, who lives here in Sydney, wasn't able to travel to India to see him, to see the funeral because of how hot it was. And she was pregnant, and so she was told not to travel into the heat. So this is happening right now, and it impacts all the issues that we're talking about here. Children and the elderly are most vulnerable to heat and air pollution. Domestic violence increases with heat waves. People have to leave their homes and become climate refugees. And, you know, it also makes everything a lot more expensive. And the solutions to the climate crisis, such as renewable energy, are also solutions to the cost of living crisis. So I think climate is one of those things that ties all the things that we care about and all the most vulnerable people. It ties it all into one big picture, because ultimately we're all living in the same climate, but it's impacting people disproportionately. And if we think about Australia, we are one of the biggest exporters of coal, which is the biggest contributor to the climate crisis. It is the single largest source of global temperature rise. So in Australia, we have a massive opportunity to directly stop the problem. We make up 5% of global emissions. We're one country. 5% is actually quite a bit. And if our government stops digging and burning coal and gas, we can, or you know, that's such a large percentage of emissions that automatically go down. And so it is critical that our next government actually stands up and stops the expansion and digging up and burning of fossil fuels, because climate change is already here and we cannot afford a single point of a degree more of warming. People in India can't afford it. People in Australia cannot afford it. People in flood-prone areas or bushfire-prone areas cannot afford it. No one's health can afford it. And so this next 4 years of government will be crucial to see if there's actually going to be a line in the sand drawn to say no to fossil fuel extraction. And so with where the parties stand this election, in terms of which party is actually going to stop fossil fuel expansion and actually cut our power bills and protect nature, the Greens are the only ones with the adequate policies that will reduce the cost of our energy bills and also stop digging up coal and gas, as well as investing in renewables and storage. But also, Labor is moving in the right direction. They've announced a lot of subsidies to support renewable energy, so that everyday Australians can have a battery subsidized in their home. Having a battery in solar will reduce your yearly energy costs by over $2,000. So that is already a massive solution to the cost of living crisis that we're facing, and Labor is promising to deliver that. They're also rejecting nuclear, which is one of the most silly and uneconomically sound ideas that the Liberal Party has put forth. And yeah, the Liberal Party's agenda is to keep digging coal, keep burning gas, increase our power bills through nuclear by $3,000, which is a brilliant idea in a cost of living crisis. And they have, no plan to protect our nature laws. So it's pretty simple when you look at the three parties. You've got the Greens asking for the right things. You've got Labor moving in the right direction, but they need a push. And that push is going to be us electing them and showing that we're voting on climate. And then you've got the Liberal Party who wants to take us back decades and continue to risk further climate destruction. And so I guess I would ask everyone that's voting in the next few weeks, vote for your health, vote for the health of your children, vote for everyone right now in South Asia who is having a heat wave bear down on them because Australia can't stop digging up fossil fuels and burning them for money.
Thank you for that. That's a sobering sort of analysis of where we are and where we are heading. Any comments? Any further sort of insights on the climate question and sustainability? All right, let's move on to Khushaal. Khushaal, you've of course been very engaged in politics. You have your podcast Unboxed, where you discuss issues of importance to community. Your work as a lawyer involves representing vulnerable youth across the country. What is your take on issues of importance for young people? I think we have to sort of not only ask young people about young people issues, but I did want to, just get your take on what are the sort of hot button things that affect you and what you're seeing in community.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was very flattered that I still got to, be asked to give the perspective from a young person's perspective. I'm like, yeah, still got it. We're good. So I'm very, very flattered on that note. Look, I think part of it you've just heard from Manjot about some of the significant issues that young people are looking at. So I'm not going to go too much into what Manjot's talked about because I think she's put it quite passionately, but I will link it to what I think the overall arching view of younger voters is. I think compared to perhaps different demographics, I think younger people at these elections and elections moving forward are actually the demographic that are looking far more forward ahead in terms of what is the most ambitious government in terms of looking after their interests. So they're not necessarily, I'm not saying that tax cuts are not something that young people care about, but those sorts of policy ideas are not necessarily linked or that persuasive to younger people in terms of saying in the next term of government, we'll have a tax cut. There's different strategies that has impacts on for different demographics, but younger people, and you've heard it from Manjot as well, when we talk about cost of living, we're talking about things from a much more structural lens that young people are deeply concerned about. So when we talk about cost of living, it's this sort of throwaway line that a lot of politicians are using this election. It does sum up a lot of issues, but so many issues are interconnected with that. One of them is climate change and energy policy. So in terms of what are our generation and what are our kids' generations going to be actually spending and what are they going to be dealing with going forward, whether it's heat waves, whether it's bushfires, whether it's being able to actually store energy in a battery so they're not having to spend as much on electricity providers, for example. So all of those do have links in what young people have at the front of their mind. That's why climate change is such a significant issue that so many young people are caring about. It's also why when we talk about cost of living, it's not so much about just an energy rebate or a tax cut, but also looking about housing affordability, where you're comparing a huge amount of intergenerational inequity that exists where our parents' generation and older than them in that sense, those voters didn't necessarily need to pay for education. They didn't necessarily need to pay as much for housing, whereas the younger generation, particularly those that don't come from generational wealth, do not have reasonable access to those opportunities anymore. And so looking towards government and what younger people are looking at is actually looking at, well, what government is actually going to be able to make sure that maybe one day I can buy a house? What government is actually going to make sure that I can afford to pay that electricity bill and do so sustainably so I'm not fighting a bushfire outside my house? More so, one of the, for example, one of the key issues on that note in terms of intergenerational inequity is that I had just today a message from a rusted on Liberal voter who told me for the first time he's not going to vote for the Liberal Party because of the Labor Party's HEX policy to actually try and give back some of that money to young people who are already so much in debt. So those are the sorts of issues that I see young people talking about, and it is unsurprising to me that young people are perhaps the most ambitious out of all demographics in terms of looking ahead, because sure, there's a self-interest there that they are going to most likely be around for a lot longer and have to deal with these issues. So they're going to be looking at government to see who's going to give us a head start to make sure that we can actually deal with those issues sustainably and effectively. The other thing that I just wanted to touch on very briefly is that I've heard from a lot of the speakers, and I think they're really, really valid points about tokenistic gestures towards multicultural communities when it comes to election time. And I did touch on it briefly in terms of our own responsibility to call it out, but I think we do need to go further. And I think Reverend Ghosh actually created a really good point that there are certain community actors, like, for example, in faith circles, that play such a critical role to speak across the board, across partisan lines, across so many different communities, and they play a vital role. I think that is a specific role that Reverend Ghosh definitely has and does so beautifully and effectively, as he showed in his answer as well. But I think, for example, the younger generation, and even those who are new migrants or first-time voters or long-time voters, we do need to actually look at what the parties are offering from a very critical lens in terms of policy. And one example of that tokenism that really upsets me, that I see happen year in, year out, every election, is, and I'll be honest with you, I am definitely left-leaning, and I make no sort of secrets about that fact. But even from a objective lens of whether you vote Liberal, whether you vote Labor, whether you vote for a different party, as migrants, one thing that should deeply upset us is the repeat issue that the Liberal Party puts forward in preferencing one nation as part of its Senate ticket. And one of those, that's an example that I don't mean to be like, oh, let me punch down on the Liberal Party, for example. But if we're actually serious in terms of talking about we don't want to be treated as mugs, we don't want to be treated as tokenistic votes, well then, we're talking about a mainstream party that is preferencing a party that is for so long and continues to be a very dangerous voice against migrants. One of the most dangerous, that most famously talks about Australia being swarmed by Asians, the one that stands up against every single migrant that has come and contributed to this country. So a vote in that sense, particularly in the Senate, means that those preference deals, means those voices continue to have a voice in the most powerful corridors in our nation. So if we are going to be serious as voters saying we don't want to be taken for tokenistic voters, we need to be making a show for it, and we need to be calling especially those very, very real examples out when they do come and visit the temple, when they do come and visit the Gurudwara or the church or the mosque, because those are the impacts that we ultimately do face, and that's why we continue to be fighting those battles today.
Wonderfully said. Thank you very much. And that's so rooted in what the reality is right now and what are the very real choices in front of people. Does anyone have a comment? I know, Shanti, I saw you really agreeing with what Khushaal said. Does anyone have a comment on that at all?
No, I think we should hear from Sudarshan.
Yes, he's been making copious
He's
notes.
been waiting patiently, so I think. Yeah.
All right. So Sudarshan, of course, your interests span democracy, sustainability, better business models. What are some of the key parameters that you're looking at for the elections? And what does, in light of the conversation you've heard today, what does meaningful and empowered representation mean to you?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for the conversation. Each one of these topics that's spoken by the previous speakers, I'd love to weave a thread through them. So in my journey of life, I've been incredibly privileged. I've been privileged in a number of different ways. Having experienced a pogrom in Sri Lanka, 1983 riots, I was curious why one group of people want to annihilate another group of people. And so I've had the privilege to just meditate on this, and even being born a Hindu, but follow Christ, do Vipassana, it's a 10-day silent meditation with Buddha's teachings, and just sit with it and sit and keep asking the deeper questions. And for me, one of the big turning points was the GFC, the global financial crisis. And I knew at that point things were broken. The business models, the things that we were shown were broken. But who went to jail for the global financial crisis? Khushaal was probably very young at that point, right? You would have been like 5 or something like that. So, for those who don't know,
you're flattering me a lot, Bob, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
So the global financial crisis, for those who are not aware, is when the financial markets melted down. And I know people who are in Ireland who bought homes and 40% negative equity. How would you feel if you lost 40% of equity? The Labour Party was very clever. So what they realized is that Two things saved us from the global financial crisis is that they realized house prices mustn't fall. And second thing is China. China helped save us in regards to that. So from a systems perspective, I go back to systems and I look at everything as being a model, right? So a church is a model. Yes, there's a behind it, but for the church to function, it's a model. Government is a model. And then behind these models, you have people and vested interests who are pulling at levers. So let's bring it back to business. I realized from an early on space after the GFC that business needs to be a force of good, and we need to measure more than money in business, because just measuring money alone doesn't give you the result. No human just measures money alone. And yet in business, that's what we've done for the last few hundred years. Now, going back to First Nation ways and ancient ways, you looked after the earth and you looked after people. And then you created something where you traded with excess. And that was perfectly sustainable. Now, fast forward to 2023, we have social, it's almost been coded in the new world of called social enterprise. So these old ways are coming back into new ways. And that's been the focus of Purpose with Profit. So now I'm going to weave threads. I raised a community, and one of those communities I realized was about well-being. So I created a startup called Mind Body Move. Dr. Shanti mentioned about preventative. This is going back 12 years ago, 2013. I was holding events to bring ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science to the public. But medical doctors didn't want to go forward at that point. Our health system is based largely on treatment for chronic health issues. In the US, 2015, a doctor comes over, the head of cardiology, the president of cardiology, the first Black president. And I asked him the question, when will systems change? And he goes, Bob, eventually the budgets are going to blow out. And then we'll have to look for those measures. So I asked the question, do we have to wait for those moments? So people, it's the awareness raising. It's like, it's deep-seated questions here. A lot of business is to create certain things at a certain point. But from a food perspective, anyone who works in the food space, they know you can make a food addictive. You can, by increasing salt, sugar, and fat, you can do certain things to it. And then we look at the other side of our health and the chronic health issues in Western Sydney and the South Asian population, right? It's quite high. So do we address it from address the symptoms perspective, or then address the causal perspective? Now, there's a huge bit here in regards to education, but I bring it back to from a business context to measure more than money, and it's sharing that story. It's sharing that story with the public to do the right thing. But here's the dilemma. Here's the dilemma, and this is why I've parked Purpose with Profit from January this year to focus on Multicultural Australia, because of the work a few of us, and Khushaal was there as well, my research after the referendum. The referendum result wasn't just about the result, but it's how the result happened. Thomas Mayo politely puts it as bad actors, but it's more than bad actors. There's a certain group who are anti-Indigenous and anti-renewables, right? And there's a thread. It has to do with money. That's it, right? So these assets that Manjot refers to, the coal, for example, we're heading to a period where in the accounting speak, it's called stranded assets, whereby they cannot take it out of the ground anymore. So the whole purpose is to delay that or get it out as fast as we can, because that's when they can make the money through it, right? And so then you have algorithms and all these methods, misinformation, disinformation, to manipulate the public and our communities and vulnerable communities with hate, where they're then losing their sense of well-being. And what do we do about all this? To give you the positive, one hope that I have is Multicultural Australia, because we still weave a thread between community leaders that's been expressed today. And so we can communicate, we can protect our families, And we can do everything that's been talked about, that we can be represented, not just for a seat at the table, but we build our own table, right? And I know I've moved away from the business side, but there's a fundamental reason for this. And it wasn't just that one episode with health and well-being. Ukraine war happens. I was negotiating I was in the plant-based food industry, to give you an example, and the plant-based food does one of the most for nature, right? I was negotiating between a Dutch company and an Italian company, and the Ukraine war happens. And of course, we know the devastation in human lives, but it also impacts how things operate. And everything went badly after that, right? And I can give other examples as well. There was a Senate inquiry about alternate meat products, which changed the trajectory of a sector. So you cannot, I'll emphasize this point, you cannot beat a system designed against your success. You cannot. You can only nudge. But we, as people, as Multicultural Australia, remembering our ancient ways, can nudge harder, right? And we're growing in momentum, and to be able to do that. So it's something significant that needs to happen. A lot of the issues that was raised, cost of housing, cost of living, it's by design. It's by vested interest. There's other Western countries who don't have these issues. So we can mimic those models and surpass the mainstream news that floods our front of mind. But yeah.
Thank you
That's
for
been
that,
helpful.
Bob. And I appreciate you weaving a lot of the threads that were discussed today. Does anyone have a comment as we close on anything that you've heard today, or anything that you'd like to leave us as a parting thought?
I'd like to just say that we are South Asians here, all of us. One of the things we do bring to this space, to this country, is our joyous presence. And I think that, and you know, we've come from generations of culture and color and stories. And so I think I really reflect on what Khushaal was saying, as well as Reverend Ghosh and Manjot as well. I actually think we should be proud of who we are, where we come from, and be able to sing with joy about that, tell the good stories, bring our strengths to the fore, not, you know, be kind of quiet, you know, migrants who need to be sort of kept in a corner and just trotted out when bloody elections come around. So I think we need to try and, you know, proudly wear our culture and our strengths without resiling from the fractures that are inherent in our cultural landscape. And I think that is very important. So many of us have been here for a longer period of time. We know that we come from a subcontinent that is, you know, has been celebrated for diversity and unity in diversity. We need to bring that particular strength to this current election and to the current polity. I think that's really, really important. Like, don't know how we, you know, we have to emphasize that. I think there's so much we can gain from learning from our own freedom struggle in India, and, you know, our constitution, which is a, you know, monumental piece of work that's celebrated all over the world. So I think those are the things that we should bring to that strength and that the knowledge, and politically as well. I mean, we have a very politically charged population. If you go to India, everyone talks about politics, you know, everyone from the rickshaw driver to, so that is a strength, I think, that is what we should bring, and not, you know, be relegated to the corner. So I'd like us to be a lot more loud and proud about who we are, and take up space and not be afraid to discuss our strengths as well as our many big weaknesses. So I think that's my bit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Bob, you had something to add to that?
Yes, I did. Couple of things. Like number one of the things I wanted to say is like what's happening in Australia should be looked at from a global perspective as well. And so democracy is in decline, and that's some of my research, which I found out afterwards, right? After the referendum. And I've been sharing this with Sukhmani Corona as well. And so what's happening in Australia, because we don't, like if you look at the US, or even Europe, certain things were foretold in the worlds that I'm living in, right? So it's not in isolation. From a voting perspective, I echo Shanti Akkar's point. We, as a group, a lot of migrants come here and feel that, oh, this is so much better, right? But there's a lot of work now that's going to be launching. I'm happy to share this, which is about to be released in a collaboration between the Arab Council about democracy and preferential voting. And I'm happy to share all the work. Khushaal was part of this when we did Desis for Yes, Tamils for Yes. We're doing Browns for Better, right? And so it's going to have the climate message, it's going to have civic democracy, and also better business models. So it's an advocacy body, non-partisan, and it's going to be coming out timely for this election as well. So yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Lots of messages of hope and of resilience and of optimism. While I love that, this conversation has not shied away from the difficult questions. And as we go into the next couple of weeks, may our communities really use their vote. May they use their vote and their voice loud and proud, as Shanti said. And thank you so much for joining us. Signing off from Hindus for Human Rights. And hopefully we'll get to talk again soon.
Thank you.
That was a lovely conversation. Thank you.